With Loki Season 2 just ending, I wanted to do a little bit of a quick breakdown about the finale of Loki Season 2. And then I wanted to talk about where essentially the show could be going next if they want to continue the show, or essentially just what's next for Loki's character and what's going to happen moving forward in the MCU. So to start off, Loki spent centuries at the start of this episode learning from Ouroboros in order to be able to build the throughput multiplier, which is just a wild concept. But if anyone was going to do it, it's someone who is already more than 1,000 years old and would be more than capable of withstanding such a long time process to complete. I mean, when you think about it, Loki would have had to have gone back in time so many different times to be able to learn all the information from Ouroboros and possibly Victor Timely that he would have needed to know to be able to make all that stuff on his own. But apparently Timely just wasn't putting his suit on correctly either, and that's why he kept spaghettifying so quickly. I love the idea that it's not even that they just needed to be going quicker or that they needed to be there earlier. It was just the fact that Timely was not putting on his suit correctly. He was being kind of an idiot with it. And I was right that we were going to get to see Victor Timely become Pasta many more times, though it's hilarious that he just didn't latch his helmet and face mask. And I love that he has, Casey go down there and latch it for him to make sure that it's actually going to work out this time, so that was pretty great. But Loki becomes incredibly knowledgeable and now does in fact possess the knowledge in order to be able to one that creates the TVA in some ways and understands the entirety of the TVA handbook because of his time spent with OB learning about physics and quantum mechanics. Though we do find out that he isn't still really the one that built the TVA, and even then, we don't really get an answer to how the TVA was built at the end of this episode. But anyway, trying to fix the loom or retrofit the loom does work after many attempts and many centuries, apparently, though the loom does continue to overload, but because there are just simply too many branches for the loom to contend with, because the timelines are branching at infinite rates, is what Victor Timely says, and you can't scale to infinity, so it's like trying to divide by zero. It just can't be done. The multiplier will never be enough. It cannot match infinity, at least according to Victor Timely. So Loki decides to go back to the Season 1 finale and tries to tell Sylvie that she can't kill He Who Remains, but she says that Loki will have to kill her instead then, and he just continually keeps failing at beating her, and she just keeps killing He Who Remains. And eventually he tries to go back even earlier when they were in the elevator with him, and that doesn't really work either. But then He Who Remains knows that he has been time-slipping, and thought Loki was actually way more advanced in his abilities. He freezes time, and then he's like, "Oh, Loki, you don't know how to freeze time yet? That's kind of weird. I thought you would have already figured that out." But then Loki does show that he knows how to freeze time. He learns it very quickly. But anyway, Kang planned that Loki would time-slip back to this point, and that he would never truly intended for Sylvie to kill him in the first place. That's kind of what he meant by reincarnation, it seems. And he also drops the bombshell that the temporal loom is a failsafe that is meant to prune the branches that aren't supposed to be there and keeps the sacred timeline in place. And this is actually pretty much what I theorized very recently in a video I posted just a day or two ago about how the temporal loom works. And I was actually wondering about whether or not the temporal loom could operate in a fashion to where it could prune branch timelines like that so that it would prevent the multiversal war from rising up. And it turns out that is legitimately just what the temporal loom does. I was more so thinking that that's what they would retrofit the temporal loom to do, but that's already what it does, and see, that's why Loki has to go out and destroy it at the end of this episode. So Loki says he will change the equation that He Who Remains has written, and he'll go and destroy the loom to bring about the multiversal war, and He Who Remains tries to talk him down from obviously. So He Who Remains offers the choice of destroying the loom and bringing Ward, or killing Sylvie and protecting the timeline as it is, protecting what they're able to protect. Though instead, Loki decides to time-slip back into the past when he was being interrogated by Mobius from the first season. Loki asks Mobius how they choose who lives and who dies. Mobius is like, "Oh, no, it's pruning. It's not killing people." Even though, in the end, it is the same when you're sending them to a void where Alioth is going to consume you. Anyway, Mobius recounts this tale of a hunter who hesitated when pruning a boy that would go on to kill 5,000 people if they didn't prune him, and when he hesitates, it causes branch timelines and more variants to appear, and it causes the deaths of several hunters because he couldn't keep the big picture in mind. And his partner was the one that went along and pruned the boy anyway, and that turned out to be Mobius and Renslayer. Mobius hesitated to prune that little boy, but Renslayer didn't, and she went on to be a judge. She was able to see the bigger picture, right? And Mobius advises Loki that you don't want to be the person that avoids the big picture because you can't live with the burden it brings. And Loki asks how you can live with that burden, and Mobius tells him scar tissue. It's something that will always be there, something that you will always have to live with, something that will forever change you no matter what. The hard thing to do, though, is the thing that has to be done. To do the impossible. There is no comfort, you choose your burden. This is Mobius's advice to Loki. Mobius and the TVA spaghettify around him, and Loki goes back to the moment before everyone spaghettified, before he controlled the time slipping in episode 5, and he pauses time right there and then to talk to Sylvie right before she's about to spaghettify. She pretty quickly deduces that he will need to kill her to prevent the timelines from branching and everything from being destroyed. Sylvie says that he is going to try to replace one nightmare with another, though, and she says sometimes it's okay to destroy something. And then Loki starts talking to himself, saying if there's a hope that you can replace that thing with something better, and he time slips back into the TVA. And this line right here is very important because it hints at what he's going to do. He's going to destroy the temporal loom, he's going to free the multiverses, in the hopes that he can replace it with something better than the TVA, something better than the temporal loom, something better than the sacred timeline. He says he knows what kind of god he needs to be for all of them, and he walks onto the gangway without a suit. And as his clothes are disintegrated, he creates his Loki costume with horns and begins to destroy the loom with his mat, ultimately freeing the multiverse and effectively, possibly causing almost a war between Kang variants. It becomes dark, and there are thick rope-like strands in every which way, and the branches begin to die. But Loki uses his magic and grabs the strands, and likely enchants them to open the void at the end of time. And it looks like the image was true. Loki pulls the timelines together and creates a branching multiverse that is interwoven and seemingly won't die, and it looks just like the World Tree Yggdrasil from Norse mythology, which is amazing considering all of the Norse themes that they've been fulfilling throughout this show. Let's talk real quick, though, about what happens right after this, right? There's talk of a 616 Kang variant being dealt with at the TVA, but that the variants aren't yet aware of the TVA. Is that the Quantumania Kang? What's a 616 adjacent realm? Like, do they mean the quantum realm, and then the quantum realm is actually adjacent to 616, or do they mean one of the branches from the 616 timeline? It's not really explained, right? But we do see a little grow together sign that demonstrates that the TVA now does likely police the multiverse, and the timelines are now interwoven in such a way that they don't overlap and die as they used to. Mobius ends up saying that he is leaving the TVA so he can see what it is that they have been protecting for so long, but he's scared to do so. And it looks like OB writes a second edition to the TVA handbook, and we see that Timely is never given the original handbook by Renslayer. Renslayer awakens in the void and is presumably consumed by Alioth, but I bet she is still going to show back up somehow, otherwise I'm not sure if we would have seen that scene. As I know she's not exactly a heroic character, but I don't know if the intention here is to actually kill her off or not, especially given her connections to He. And so what does this mean for Loki? I'm honestly not sure. It kind of, to me, means that we are likely not to see Loki again for a long time, if at all. He's kind of now in a situation where he is someone who is kind of a linchpin within the multiverse, kind of an absolute point almost, that is kind of holding everything together, right? It seemingly has been implied that without the temporal loom, the multiverse just begins to die. Though it's also been implied that the multiverse begins to die because of Kang variants, and so then it also makes us wonder, once Kang is defeated, maybe Loki can come back into the fray. It's not very clear, though. But what is clear is that Loki is kind of in somewhat of like an almost Atlas Shrugged position, where he is someone who is now burdened, right, with having to hold the multiverse together, to keep it alive, to watch over it, right? He seemingly gets to watch his friends, right? He gets to watch his friends as they live their lives on the timeline or as they remain in the TVA. And so I don't know if Tom Hiddleston is going to be returning. This really, to me, seems like a really fitting end for this character, right? Like, he essentially has finally gotten the throne that he somewhat wanted, but it is a hesitant acceptance of the throne. This is not a throne that he necessarily even wanted, and it's something that he even tells Sylvie earlier on in this episode again, that he doesn't want a throne, that's not what he's seeking. But it's something that he's realized that he has to fulfill, right? He was born to be a king. It's something I talked about in my previous videos. Loki was born to be a king, and he was born to be a king not of some broken, destitute people. He was born to be a king for a much greater purpose. Clearly, he knew that there was a glorious purpose out there for him, and he fulfilled it in this episode. Loki found his glorious purpose to manage and watch over the multiverse, to be the one to maintain the life of the multiverse so that free will can flourish. Even if it means having to contend with the Kang dynasty. Under the weight of the world, Atlas shrugged. Under the weight of the multiverse, Loki smiled.